Hello and welcome to the ECA podcast series. I'm Ernest Chicho. Africa is at a critical juncture, grappling with major challenges exacerbated by global economic instability, climate change, socio-political turmoil, and widespread distrust. Some economists argue that the continent's issues are particularly acute because the global financial systems are inadequate and have failed the continent.
We cannot continue with a global financial architecture in which our countries do not have the needed access, needed resources for recovery.
The system is not with us, it's against us. We need to come up with something to re-engineer this international financial architecture. We should not accept it to be unfairly treated all the time.
Voices there from some members of a high-level working group on the global financial architecture reforms. The group is coordinated by the Economic Commission for Africa. But why is it that despite being endowed with over 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land and freshwater resources, Africa is still experiencing an increase in hunger? This stark contrast is further aggravated by the continent's disproportionate burdens and risks arising from climate-related disasters, droughts, flood, and unpredictable storms that not only trigger humanitarian crises but also compromise economic stability. To address these serious challenges, key players on the continent must work together. Acting alone as a country, organization, or individual for that matter will not suffice. In an earlier interview with Uganda's ambassador to Ethiopia and Djibouti, Rebecca Otengo, she talked about the importance of a harmonized approach to development in Africa.
There are things that have worked in some countries, but there are countries who are struggling with the same thing. We can share some of this knowledge, skills, and also different approaches.
If you had an audience, a joint audience of the African Union and the United Nations sitting here, and you had 1 minute, 2-3 minutes to address them, what would you tell them?
Yesterday, when we sat in the room, you could have heard the member states speak, UN spoke, the private sector, our partners, and the African Union had the deputy chair. You would see that we are also speaking about the same things, but where do we merge and have these voices amplified in an implementable manner? I would say, let's stop the silos, let's work in a coordinated manner, deliver as one, because the objective is one.
Deliver as one because the objective is one. Now, that was the understanding amongst African ministers of finance, planning and economic development who met in Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe in March this year. Their focus was to develop unified policies to drive the continent towards green and inclusive economic growth and enhance resilience against socio-economic shocks. The ministerial discussions took place during the African Conference of Ministers, organized each year by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. As the conference concluded, several key outcomes and action points were identified, setting a clear path forward for addressing Africa's pressing challenges and harnessing its vast potential. On climate change, the ministers concluded that promoting green bonds and carbon credits are essential tools for financing sustainable development projects. They emphasized the urgent need to mobilize $1.8 trillion required for climate action by 2030 and called for global cooperation to support Africa's climate finance needs. On economic policy reforms, agreements were reached to enhance policy frameworks that support economic integration with particular focus on accelerating the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The ministers underscored the need for structural and fiscal reforms to improve economic governance and resilience, alongside strategies to mobilize domestic resources more effectively and promote private sector involvement in economic development.
We need to focus on deepening domestic resource mobilization for sustainability. External borrowing has become costly, unreliable, and untenable. Therefore, reforming our tax systems and de-risking the business environment are unavoidable imperatives. We simply cannot do business without the private sector. Hence, the need to invest in capital market development to provide long-term resources for private sector investment.
On technology and infrastructural development, the conference endorsed initiatives to bridge technological gaps and foster innovation through partnerships with global tech leaders. They highlighted the role of artificial intelligence and digital technologies in boosting economic growth and addressing societal challenges. Plans were outlined to develop comprehensive digital transformation strategies that include improving connectivity and enhancing digital skills across the continent. On the question of debt management and financial reforms, there was a consensus on pursuing reforms in the global financial system to address the challenges of managing high debt levels and achieving financial sustainability. The ministers discussed the complexities of current debt levels and called for the development of new financial instruments and mechanisms that consider the unique challenges faced by African economies. They also emphasized the need for fair access to international finance for African nations. To wrap up the ministerial deliberations, the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and Zimbabwe's Minister of Finance held a press conference to provide a comprehensive summary of the discussions and key outcomes.
We did spend time looking at, for example, how we could attract more investment into the renewable energy space, which is a critical pillar of the response to the climate change agenda, how we can improve the environment for doing business, how we can improve certain incentives that will attract investment into renewable energy. Also considered how we could take advantage of climate finance opportunities, including the market for carbon credits, both voluntary and involuntary, but also how we could extract more resources from climate-related funds that were put up by the global international financial community. We also looked at and examined the design of some of the instruments, such as, for instance, the Resilience and Sustainability Trust Fund, which the IMF administers, which is a long-term fund which countries can access in order to respond to climate imperatives. And we examined how perhaps this fund could improve access to countries that have got different circumstances, how certain conditions could be loosened. We also considered issues such as domestic resource mobilization to increase revenue raising within our own countries, various ways to get more tax revenue, for example, and then harmonizing tax rules across our countries, learning from each other, and collaborating with UN agencies for us to be all aligned globally in terms of international cooperation around the taxation agenda.
Well, you have it there. These outcomes and action points provide a robust framework for Africa to address its key challenges and leverage its immense potential for a sustainable and prosperous future. And that brings us to the end of our program today. I'm Ernest Chicho. Thank you for watching and stay safe. Goodbye.